back for part 3, all about thought leadership. Let's get back to it. Randall, you are not just an advocate for, creating that thought leadership, but even more so that regular drip. You would even recommend, a weekly content, weekly blog, weekly podcast. Keep your name out there, right? If the goal becomes a schedule, doesn't that risk diluting the quality of the content? If the goal is not just to, share the eureka moments.
I think this is what might differentiate actually somebody who truly is a thought leader, where there's no shortage of insights whatsoever, as opposed to somebody who struggles to actually put something together. There's nothing wrong with being a thought follower. You could have a great business, right? You could have a lot of fun doing that business. You can grow your business. It's just that you're not at the thought leadership sort of level, right? So, for me, there's no shortage of ideas. There's no shortage of ideas. I'd like to go back though to one of the first things you said in that question, though, Rania. The purpose of doing this drip, sending it out, isn't just for marketing purposes, but it's also for me, for my purposes. It helps me explore ideas in greater depth. It helps, codify some of the knowledge. It allows me to wire things together that I wouldn't have others. So, for example, I've got a coaching client, and they ask me a particular question and everything. Okay, I'm interacting. I've got some insights, etc. Okay, I can actually, explore them in greater, depth, right, and figure out those connections when I'm not on the clock with that client. When, the time for me to deliver is not the time for me to, think deeply about something. I should have done that thinking deeply beforehand. And I think that the regular thinking deeply, they say the brain is a muscle. I know it's not really, but it is, in the sense that if you don't train it, and if you don't constantly put more stuff into it and you wire the connections up, it's a very funny thing. For the last while, we there's not another day before there's not another AI announcement. And one of the things, if you look at all these AI announcements, they talk about large language models, and this one's got 800 million parameters. This one's got 2.3 billion parameters. This one's got 5 billion parameters. The numbers are going up and up and up and up. Why? The reason why is that the more parameters that these AIs are able to sort of put in, the more likely that the output will be something that's reasonable. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why these models hallucinate and make things up, and some, they probabilistic figure out what's going on. But in a certain sense, what's happening in the AI world is something that very often we as experts sometimes forget. We need to make sure that we're adding new parameters as well. Earlier on, we talked about how many books you read, or I read every single week, right? Or a podcast, or all the other things that sort of, all the training, and that's really, I think, the challenge. How are you adding more parameters into your brain? And for me, part of doing it is to say, fine, there's a lot in there, but I have to work really hard to wire them together in ways that generate what I think are useful and new insights, right? So that weekly tip sheet, or the white papers, or the videos, or all the other stuff that we put out as the brain trust. For me personally, it's the processing of all of that before I'm actually with clients, whether it's coaching or on a stage or doing CPD or any kind of advisory work, etc. And I think that's very, very fundamental beyond the marketing benefit of actually having all this stuff out there.
Let's imagine all the entrepreneurs and leaders out there inspired to start their thought leadership journey. They're ready to start pumping out the high quality thoughts that readily come to mind. Okay, how much patience is required before they start seeing ROI? Okay, is the value instantaneous? I know for us, our model is largely what do our clients and prospects want? We create content for them and we point them to it and they consume it and they love it. And then like the machine's moving, but for someone else that doesn't have the structure set up, like how patient do they have to be?
Um, I think that there's a short-term and a long-term answer to that, right? The long term is, if in a certain sense, if you look at all this content that you might put out there, this thought leadership content that might be generated, every single piece that you have is like a soldier fighting on your behalf, whether you're eating, sleeping, serving your clients, doing marketing, or just having a coffee. And so there's a long-term benefit that these soldiers will be doing stuff for you, whether it's like SEO or whether it's some other kind of mechanism, right? So that's the long term. The short term is gee, how might you actually start using some of this thought leadership content today beyond the idea of posting a blog or a video or the million other different types of thought leadership in different channels. So here's a whole bunch of ideas. You're in the midst of a pitch for new business, right? And because you've pre-thought out some of these ideas in your thought leadership, you now can contextualize them as you answer that prospective client or real client's questions. Number two, after you've left that meeting, you typically would send a thank you note to that client. Here, thank you very much, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, this is what I call the power of the PS. Okay. You could write at the very bottom of it, PS. When we talk about such and such, what came to mind is a white paper I wrote not too long ago. I've attached it for your information. Okay, there we go. There's another short-term use, right? Because it credentializes you and allows you the prospective client to explore your knowledge, okay, in a different format beyond just the pitch or the information meeting or whatever it happens to be. Number three, it could be used in delivery. So, for example, when we organize retreats for a client, we very much there's a whole bunch of pre-reading. Well, thank you, because we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these articles. What we'll typically do is we'll put together a small number of those for everyone on the retreat to actually pre-read before we actually go and facilitate the retreat itself. Why? It gives everyone a common vocabulary and skills them up a little bit. And it's actually being used in this particular case as part of the delivery mechanism, not part of the marketing and business development. All these things are benefits that can be used now if you want, right? Same thing with respect to repurposing. It's not like we're going to write something and then it can't be repurposed in longer form or shorter form or video or an audio and podcast and interview, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is stuff that can be used now, short-term ROI, but over time, there's that longer-term ROI. What was the word that I used? Sustainable competitive differentiator. And it's very, very helpful. As I said, right near the very top, do a search for choosing a business growth speaker, just as an example. Okay, and that's an example of a long-term benefit. Nobody else lays claim to that particular one. Eventually somebody might, but at least at the time of our recording today, that's me. There's some advertisements, on every Google result, but beyond the ads, I'm number one or close to it, right? So I think the ROI is an important one. But think about it. Return on investment. What's the investment that you're making, right? And if the investment is one that is, you're very inefficient in actually the content creation, because you've never done it before, you've become an expert in your field of endeavor, but you haven't become an expert in, say, writing or ideation or a whole bunch of other things. You haven't become an expert in speaking. You haven't become an expert. You don't know all the different channels, etc. Okay, you're inefficient, right? So guess what? We said at the top of the hour, there's things that can help. I'm thinking about our thought leadership course or building influence impact or super efficient writing and editing or the personal branding course, like all those kinds of things. There's no reason why your investment has got to be one that's bigger than it needs to be, right? Or coaching, that's also another way to invest that'll make you more efficient, which means the longer term impact, ROI specifically, of the your thought leadership strategy would be better, right? Your time is worth something. My God, most people who are in the corner office or truly experts, what's your billing rate? Okay, how much if you're able to save several hours, okay, and make that billable time instead of non-billable time, no reason to be inefficient, right? None. Or to have to figure it out yourself. There's the problem's been solved before.
Randall, you said there are people that call themselves thought leaders who may very well not be, and people who may be who do not use that title. In a world where there is certification for absolutely everything, why do we not see more thought leadership credentials out there? I know this is a gap that we at the Brain Trust Professional Institute identified, and we do offer a certificate in thought leadership, including the courses you've mentioned here. Why do you think that is?
Part of the question boils down to what we've been discussing, really, which is how do you define the thought leader, right? Because the thought, it's defined by the followers, right? The clients, the community of interest. So for example, if somebody's a very specialized type of a forensic accountant, okay, being a thought leader in that particular field, right, is very, very difficult for anybody to get a very specific certification on, right? You can get something that says you've passed a bunch of courses, right? You can build a company in the area that gets a lot of, press, etc. But who's going to be doing the certifying on this? It's very, very difficult. So you're right. We've got a certificate of achievement in terms of having gone through the process of learning. Okay, but what I think is completely, there's a bunch of there's a bunch of organizations that'll say who are the world's top thought leaders on such and such, and it's kind of like an annual kind of article that newspapers do, who's most influential in the area of such and such. But once again, that's not a certification. That's some journalists kind of take on it using whatever criteria they happen to, right? To use. It's an interesting fodder. It's like, oh, I didn't know that person or this person, right? And I think that it's just so hard to do. Partially, how many thought leaders actually are there in any particular field, right? The number of people who are in professional services who call themselves thought leaders is just absolutely mind-boggling. I was, several years ago, I was speaking at a conference on thought leadership. Interestingly, I was the keynote speaker, and in the audience were CPAs and management consultants. So people, and I put up I asked the audience at the very beginning, okay, who here calls themselves a thought leader? And no surprise, like 90% of the hands went up. There's a lot of hands that went up in this huge room. And I could say, how do you know? Right. And I went through the 10 tests. Okay. They were a little, and then I asked them at the very end and I said, two questions. Number one, how many people right now would honestly say, yeah, I'm a thought leader? And maybe a spattering of hands went up. Right. Then I said, how many of you have got a much better idea of what you need to do to move from being an expert to being a thought leader? And once again, all the hands went up. Right? If you got the recipe, it's not so hard to sort of get the ingredients and just make it happen. If you don't have the recipe, it's a lot harder. I think it's a very, very interesting question. Thank you for asking.
We talked about certification. So next comes the community of the certified. You said what makes a thought leader? It depends on the followers. So that poses a challenge for the certification process. But there are associations for absolutely every community. You, for instance, are part of CAPS, the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, where there is a mix of the big shots, the big name speakers, the the headliners and the new and the curious who want to learn, the budding, aspiring speakers. You said at the top of the hour, which is very interesting to me, that one of the benefits of being a thought leader is access to that community of experts, of highly accomplished individuals in their own field. So where does this cabal meet? Where's the association of thought leaders? And just as we had to create, the certification to codify the learning with our own certification, do we have to create the association of thought leaders?
Um, the answer is the association of listen, you've got people in every particular field that are at the very beginning of their career. You've got people who are the workhorses that just have got a great life doing what they're doing. You've got people who are, truly experts in the area, and then you've got a small number in any particular field who really are the thought leaders, right? And so when we say, if I go to any particular narrow field, there's people in that entire spectrum, right? So the question you ask is horizontally, where do we actually find people who are thought leaders? Okay, on one hand, it's it's uh, um, it's organized in a certain sense by a modality of delivery. So for example, certified management consultants. There's a lot of people there who are thought leaders because they've spent their entire career in their very narrow area of consulting, and they're truly at the top of their game. And some of them that are like me, FCMCs. There's organizations like the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, which is an association for experts who speak. Well, there's a number of those that are thought leaders, probably more so there than or and CMC than sort of other sort of vertically oriented, right? Um, Same thing with respect to some of the writers, right? And there's some people that are just amazing communicators who and universities, there's a lot of thought leaders that are absolutely there. They're called, professors. They've devoted their entire career on the very narrow topic, right? So in a certain sense, there are places where those thought leaders tend to go. The question of where's the community of thought leaders, gee, maybe we should actually put one together. Um, is an interesting one. But the question of any particular thought leader's path and how they use that to monetize and grow and differentiate their business, right? It's not a question of the individual. It's also a question of where they actually fit, within their organization. When I was at KPMG years and years and years ago, right? How any individual partner was positioned as a thought leader when they might not have written the particular piece, etc. There's the question of, gee, how do we position the firm as a whole as a thought leader versus the individual partners? Very interesting conversation, right? And it's different for every firm. So I think that an association of thought leaders, I think is an association of wannabe thought leaders. So I'll share one thing. I was horrified, just absolutely horrified. Um, I'm Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. Fine. That's an association I'm active in. I'm involved in. I've been for years, and they decided to redevelop their website. The website just went live, right? And part of the homepage of the website was showcasing the different types of actual speakers there were. And there was the keynote speakers, and there's the trainers, and then there's thought leaders and big pictures, okay, of and they put me as the thought leader. And I'm thinking, no. I don't call myself a thought leader. I think calling yourself a thought leader is the epitome of arrogance and ego and everything. And I said, I feel uncomfortable. I do not call myself a thought leader. I call myself a whole bunch of other things, but definitely not that, right? It's for other people. And they said, Randall, we're the other people. As far as we're concerned, okay, you are a thought leader in the areas of this, and this. And whether you like it or not, that's how we see you. And that's how the market sees you. So I said, okay, fine. Okay, fine. But I think that if we had an association of thought leaders or a community of thought leaders, I think we would have a lot of people who would want to be thought leaders. And maybe that's an interesting business angle for us. But I think that the people who are the real thought leaders are actually out there doing the thinking, doing the advising, doing the consulting, doing the building of their business, right? And that's kind of where they're thinking. The purpose of thought leadership is not to become a thought leader per se, right? But it's to achieve a bigger goal, which is the impact in your particular marketplace and beyond, right? It's not in and of itself the goal itself. Now, if we're talking about influencers and influence marketing, that the goal of that is to increase influence so that you could get sponsorships and sell more stuff online, right? That's a different kind of thing than thought leadership. So it's a good question, and I've thought a lot about it, and no, I'll never say never, but I think right now it's more important to say, okay, how do we help people who truly are experts, but who are aspiring to get that next level to do that, and gee, we happen to have a blueprint, so.
I'll ask one more question, then I'll give you the final word, Randall. Randall, why would you go out of your way to not call yourself a thought leader? Like, why see an attribute you admire and respect, and maybe are somewhere in the vicinity, maybe, and the idea of attributing it to yourself, as you said, the epitome of arrogance, like for me, knowing you're a genuine person, this feels truly like a misunderstanding of what humility is. Like if I could make a parallel, we could have supermodels who are beautiful by every beauty standard. And they may be torturing themselves and obsessing about their weight and plastic surgery and whatever their internal dialogue is. This is a beautiful person, okay? So like why they're not arguing they're not beautiful. They're getting paid the big bucks to be on magazine covers, right? So why, Randall? I want why spend any time going, I'm not a thought leader?
I I don't know. Maybe I've got this all wrong, and maybe you're right. I should start calling myself a thought leader. But nobody ever, no client or anybody sort of woke up in the morning and said, "I need to find myself a thought leader." They typically say, "Well, I need to solve my problem. Okay, I need to find somebody that I can trust to help me with whatever it happens to be." And I think that I'm I don't know what the word is. Uncomfortable with so many people who are clearly, in my view, not thought leaders, you banding about the term. And I think the term is very, very much overused, partially by those who are not thought leaders, but really are experts, but they're not thought leaders. And I don't really want to be, I don't want to say associated, but I don't want to be part of the flotsam and jetsam of all those people. I'd rather, for example, people go, if you go to my randallcraig.com website, if you look at the main menu, there's three things. There's thought leadership, there's speaking and coaching. And if you go into that thought leadership menu, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of my thought leadership where you can actually engage with it, right? And I'd rather say I've got amazing thought leadership and I can make a difference. And the brain trust professionals can make a substantive difference to a client or to a sector or whatever it is, or to an individual leader, than have the focus purely on me. I'd rather people read the content and say, that's kind of um, the foundational underpinnings of the work that we do at the Brain Trust. So maybe it is really, really false and incorrect humility, right? But I also do think that if somebody looks at the thought leadership of things, if they read the white papers or see the videos, or if you're listening to this right now, you get a sense of what things are about. It's not about me, right? It's about the ideas, okay, that the brain trust sort of has developed and can develop and make a difference today to a particular organization. And so I'm okay if other people call me a thought leader, but I'll never call myself that. Just in the way that the supermodels don't say, "Oh, hello, I'm a supermodel." Okay, it's no, everybody else is saying you're a supermodel, right? And I think that kind of thing. I'm sure some supermodels call themselves on their CV, it says current, supermodel, right? But I suspect it's really more about take a look at my photography portfolio or whatever supermodels get to use to get business. For us, it's really the question of the content and the interactions and the conversations that we have beforehand. And let's demonstrate the fact. So if I'm a thought leader and I'm having interaction, let me demonstrate it. And you know what? I do this, for many of my coaching clients, my non-yet coaching clients, I say, I don't know if I can help you, but why don't I give you an hour of my time and you can ask me anything. And let's see during this hour whether I'm able to significantly move the needle, right? Forget about the title thought leader. They don't care about that. A leader's got some very tough challenges. They know what they know. They don't know what they don't know. And so let's see that work actually in action, right? And I think that's kind of where my mindset is. If I look at my business card, you remember those? It doesn't have thought leader on it, but it does have other things that might cue people into the fact that I've got something to say, particularly with respect to business and business growth and so on, leadership. So
You took the words out of my mouth, Randall, that the supermodel doesn't go, "Hi, I'm Cindy and I'm beautiful." But if someone says you're beautiful, to my mind, it does seem disingenuous to go, "No, I'm not." And they're all right. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be on your name tag, but I do think, if a big part of what we're seeing is that there is confusion about what the term means and people call themselves who aren't. I think that disqualifying yourself on false humility doesn't add to the conversation.
hey, fair enough.
Okay, Randall, I'm going to give you the last word. Has my plan worked? Have I given you new thoughts on thought leadership?
Rania, you always give new thoughts. So most of the viewers, listeners right now don't realize that it doesn't matter how clever I am. Okay, once Rania gets her hands on it, all of a sudden there's all kinds of tough questions that need to be addressed or new ideas. And when Rania actually creates something or puts something together, obviously I do the same thing with hers. So yeah, absolutely. So last word. One of the things we have not talked about in this particular session is the issue of trust and being a trusted advisor. And I wanted to disambiguate between being a thought leader and a trusted advisor. And I'll do that by stepping back and saying, every organization is somewhere in the triangle of price, expertise, and trust from a strategic perspective, right? Some compete on price. We can do it cheaper, right? Others do it, compete on expertise. Yeah, we can solve your problem. And others compete on trust. Yes, no matter what we say, you can trust us, right? But if you sort of like amplify price, expertise, and trust, that becomes, the question of value. For expertise, that moves to thought leadership. And for trust is moves to trusted advisor. And if you could imagine it, if you will, almost a matrix where you've got trust from low to high going up and down, and you've got thought leadership going along the x-axis along the bottom, you can almost have like four quadrants. And one of the quadrants when there's no thought leadership and there's little trust, I call that commodity. It's not something that's sustainable, not a way that you want to grow your business. But too often, businesses are commodities. And what happens when you're in that commodity space? The only way to compete is reducing price, right? That's the only way. So you don't want to be there. What happens, for example, if you've got very low thought leadership, but very, very high trust? I call that the golfer, right? Yes, they trust everything you say, but there's not much that you're actually saying that's of value, right? And that's great because you're an expert on building trust and building those relationships. But is it sustainable? The answer to that one is no, because eventually somebody else will come along, somebody who's that's higher in that thought leadership scale, who will be able to say, yeah, and by the way, this is why this is the right solution. So trust by itself is not the only way, is not the way to build a business. But there's a lot of people who do a great job playing golf. If you've got very, 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 very high thought leadership, but you're very low on the trusted advisor scale, I call those the academics. They are so, so, so narrow in and deep in that particular area. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're off somewhere in their minds, right? They haven't built the trust, okay, with a particular organization yet to be able to say, yeah, this is actually going to work, right? Where we want to be is in that top right hand corner where you are absolutely a thought leader, but you're also a trusted advisor, and that is what I call the stars. And that's obviously where you want to where you want to be. And I think that too often, people say, "Oh, I'm a trusted advisor and thought leadership," and we just use those words, not thinking about the golfer, commodities, academics, and stars. Because if you want to be in the star, the question, what are you doing actually to move from from having expertise to being an expert to being a thought leader? Like, what are you doing to move along that particular dimension? And likewise, and we haven't talked about trust today really, what are you doing to move from a low trust to high trust? Right. And so if you're able to do both of those things, you'll end up where you need to be, which is star. And that is a place where truly you could develop that sustainable competitive advantage. And that's why, even if you're not really at the thought leadership sort of spot that you want to be, if you recognize that moving towards that has some strategic benefit beyond the tactical stuff that we've been talking today, you're going to be in the right place.
Thank you, Randall, for the conversation, and thank you to everyone who's joined and listened in. If any of the issues we talked about today resonate with you, if you're curious, if your curiosity has been piqued today about developing your own thought leadership, do reach out. We'd be happy to learn about you and your organization and have a conversation, share resources. If you want to get an invite to our live monthly Q&A session, do reach out, info@randallcraig.com, follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll see you next time.